What if I told you that Apple, the trillion-dollar company that reshaped technology, was not actually built by Steve Jobs? Shocking? Maybe. But behind the iconic turtleneck and the grand stage presentations stood another man, crouched over a soldering iron, breathing in the sweet aroma of burnt flux. His name? Steve Wozniak, the guy who actually made Apple's first computers work. To put it simply, if Apple were a rock band, Jobs was Mick Jagger, strutting across the stage, screaming, "We will change the world!" Meanwhile, Wozniak was the quiet guitarist, the one whose riffs made the crowd lose their minds. And yet, after the show, who do people remember? Exactly, the frontman. So why does history worship Jobs while Wozniak gets pushed into the shadows? The answer lies in the eternal tension between the builder of the machine and the seller of the dream. And that, my friends, is both the comedy and the tragedy of Apple's origin story. Before there was Apple, there was just Wozniak, a brilliant kid who treated circuits the way Mozart treated music sheets. While other teenagers were busy chasing dates, Wozniak was busy chasing voltage. His childhood hobby was not baseball or football, but building ham radios and calculators. And let me tell you, nothing impresses the ladies in high school like showing off your homemade microprocessor. Spoiler, it did not impress anyone. Wozniak had the rare gift of seeing the logic of electronics the way a poet sees words. He could reduce complex circuits into elegant designs with fewer chips, fewer parts, and somehow make them run faster. This talent later became Apple's secret weapon. Of course, like every great inventor, he had a little streak of mischief. Wozniak was famous for creating blue boxes, illegal devices that let people make free long-distance calls. Imagine two nerds in the early 1970s prank calling the Vatican with technology they built in a garage. Yes, that actually happened. And one of those nerds? Steve Jobs. But the real breakthrough came when Wozniak designed the Apple I in 1976. It was not just a hobby project. It was a revolution in personal computing. Unlike the clunky mainframes of the time, Wozniak's design was elegant, compact, and actually usable by ordinary people. To Jobs, it was dollar signs. To Wozniak, it was pure joy. Then came the Apple II, the machine that truly put Apple on the map. And here's the historical fact most people forget. The Apple II was entirely Wozniak's brainchild. He engineered it, built it, perfected it. Its color graphics, expansion slots, and overall affordability set it miles ahead of the competition. While Jobs was busy convincing investors and journalists, Wozniak was quietly building the product that would make Apple a household name. In other words, Apple's early success rested not on a marketing slogan, not on a keynote speech, but on Wozniak's soldering iron and his relentless pursuit of technical elegance. If Jobs was the showman, Wozniak was the magician pulling off tricks that nobody else could replicate. The tragedy? Magicians rarely get the applause, they just make the show possible. Now let us shift the spotlight, literally, because while Wozniak was sweating over resistors and capacitors, Steve Jobs was already rehearsing for the stage. Jobs was not an engineer. He could not design a circuit to save his life. But what he did have was a kind of magnetic charisma that turned even the most boring technical breakthrough into a revolution for mankind. He was the kind of guy who could sell sand to a beach. In Silicon Valley, he sold a dream to the world. Here's the secret. Jobs understood that invention alone does not change the world. Storytelling does. He wrapped technology in myth. The Apple I was not just a circuit board. To Jobs, it was the first step in liberating humanity from corporate mainframes. Never mind that it was basically Woz's weekend project. By the time the Apple II hit the market, Jobs was the face of the company. Clean-shaven, intense eyes, already practicing that messianic stare that later made him the master of keynote presentations. He wore his black turtleneck not yet, but even in his scrappy youth, Jobs radiated the aura of a man who belonged under spotlights, not fluorescent garage lamps. And the press loved him. Journalists do not want to interview a shy engineer mumbling about chips and logic gates. They want a visionary promising to put a dent in the universe. That was Jobs' line. And the world ate it up. Woz built the Apple II, but Jobs made it into the Apple II narrative, a machine that would empower a generation. Think of it this way. If Wozniak wrote the sheet music, Jobs was the rock star who belted it out on stage. Without Woz, there is no melody. Without Jobs, there is no stadium singing along. But here comes the irony. While Woz was the reason Apple had something to sell, Jobs was the reason anyone bought it. Investors trusted him. Customers adored him. Employees feared him, but also followed him. Even Bill Gates once remarked that Jobs had an incredible ability to focus. Translation: the man could hypnotize you into believing a beige plastic box was the future of civilization. And so, piece by piece, Jobs claimed the spotlight. Woz remained the builder, but Jobs became the story. In the theater of technology, the spotlight never lingers on the stagehands, no matter how essential they are. It follows the man at center stage, and Steve Jobs played that role like a natural-born actor. Conflict, the clash between the engineer and the showman. Here is where the story turns from comedy into drama. Because let us be honest, you cannot put two very different Steves in the same garage without sparks flying. On one side, Steve Wozniak, the gentle engineer, believed technology should be fun, open, and accessible. His dream was simple: build cool machines that people could use. On the other side, Steve Jobs, the ambitious visionary, believed technology should be sleek, closed, and let us be blunt, profitable. His dream was not just to build computers, but to build an empire. The clash was inevitable. Woz wanted to give away schematics at hobbyist clubs. Jobs wanted to sell every screw for a profit. Woz delighted in solving technical puzzles for the sake of beauty. Jobs delighted in pushing people past their limits, sometimes to the edge of madness. The cultural gap between them widened as Apple grew. Woz remained a tinkerer at heart, happiest when hunched over a circuit board. Jobs thrived in boardrooms and press interviews, demanding perfection from employees and dazzling investors with promises of insanely great products. And then came the breaking point: the Apple III and early corporate politics. Wozniak grew increasingly disillusioned. He once admitted, "My goal was to build computers." Jobs' goal was to change the world. On paper, those two things sound aligned. In reality, they were worlds apart. The contrast could not have been sharper. Jobs was fiery, confrontational, willing to cut throats if that meant moving Apple forward. Woz was collaborative, modest, almost too kind for the dog-eat-dog Silicon Valley. After a near-fatal plane crash in 1981 that left him with memory issues, Woz decided to step back. He returned briefly, but the corporate wars, the egos, and the politics made it clear. This was no longer the company he wanted to be part of. Think of it like this: if Apple was a rocket ship, Woz was the guy who built the engine. Jobs was the guy who grabbed the controls, kicked everyone out of the cockpit, and declared, "Buckle up, we are going to the moon." Woz just wanted a smooth ride. Jobs wanted the headlines. The result? The engineer faded into the background, and the showman took the throne. For Woz, it was bittersweet. He had achieved what most dreamers never do. He helped create a company that would redefine technology. But in the grand narrative of Apple, his name became a footnote. Jobs became the legend. By the late 1980s and into the 1990s, Apple had become a household name. But ask the average person on the street who founded Apple, and 9 out of 10 would say Steve Jobs. The irony is rich. Without Wozniak's Apple II, there may never have been a company to celebrate. Yet the cameras, the interviews, and the biographies rarely pointed toward the engineer. Meanwhile, Woz quietly drifted into a different life. After leaving Apple's day-to-day operations, he taught kids about computers, sponsored rock concerts, and even appeared on shows like Dancing with the Stars. Yes, the father of the Apple II once foxtrotted on national television. His legacy became more about being the kind genius than the titan of industry. Jobs, on the other hand, staged one of the most legendary comebacks in business history. After being ousted from Apple in 1985, he returned in 1997, transformed the company, and unleashed products like the iMac, iPod, iPhone, and iPad. Suddenly, Steve Jobs was no longer just a CEO. He was a cultural icon, a prophet of design and innovation. The black turtleneck became his armor, the keynote stage, his pulpit. The world canonized Jobs as a visionary who changed the world. Time magazine put him on the cover. Hollywood made movies about him. Walter Isaacson wrote a best-selling biography. By contrast, Wozniak was remembered fondly, but as a secondary character, the quirky genius who helped Jobs get started. And yet, let us not rewrite history entirely. The DNA of Apple, the emphasis on elegance, simplicity, and personal empowerment, was seeded by Woz engineering brilliance. Every sleek iPhone traces its lineage back to the Apple II, designed almost single-handedly by Wozniak. But history is not written by soldering irons. It is written by storytellers. And Jobs controlled the story. That is why his face adorns posters and motivational quotes, while Woz is the answer to a trivia question. The lesson is both tragic and comic. Tragic, because Wozniak deserved more recognition. Comic, because Woz himself never seemed to care that much. He once said, "I was not destined to run a company. My role was just to be a happy engineer." And in that sense, he won his own kind of legacy. Respected by those who know the truth, loved by those who value heart over hype. So here we are, Jobs the immortal visionary, Woz the forgotten builder. One is remembered for denting the universe, the other for quietly soldering the dent in the first place. So what do we learn from this tale of two Steves? That history is unfair? That storytellers get statues while builders get buried in the footnotes? Perhaps. But let us dig deeper. The truth is, the world does not run on genius alone. It runs on the uneasy marriage between builders and sellers. Woz could design the most elegant computer in the world, but without Jobs, it might have stayed a hobbyist toy, admired by a handful of geeks in a garage. Jobs could dazzle investors with his vision, but without Woz, he would have had nothing but empty promises and a turtleneck. This is not just about Apple. It is about life. Every great idea needs both a mind that can create it and a mouth that can explain it. The Wright brothers built the plane, but it took storytellers to convince the world it could fly. Einstein wrote the equations, but without popularizers, relativity would still be locked in academic papers. Of course, balance is rare. Sometimes the builder overshadows the seller. Sometimes the seller devours the builder's credit. Apple is simply one of the most famous examples of this imbalance. Woz did not lose because he lacked brilliance. He lost because he did not crave the spotlight. And Jobs, he won because he knew the spotlight was half the battle. The lesson for us is both humbling and practical. If you are a Woz, find your Jobs. If you are a Jobs, find your Woz. Otherwise, your idea may never leave the garage. Or worse, you may leave the garage with nothing worth selling. And if you want to be both, good luck. That is like asking one person to be both Einstein and Oprah. Possible, but rare. And so we circle back to the original question. Who really built Apple? The answer is simple and complicated at the same time. Woz built the machine. Jobs built the myth. One without the other. And Apple might have been nothing more than another forgotten startup in a California garage. Yet history chose the man in the turtleneck, not the man with the soldering iron. That may seem unfair, but it is also inevitable. Spotlights follow the storyteller, not the stagehand. Legends are written by those who dare to stand in front of the crowd, not those who quietly wire the lights behind it. But here's the punchline. The next time you swipe your iPhone screen or listen to a podcast about changing the world, remember there was once an engineer named Steve Wozniak who just wanted to build a computer because he thought it was fun. Without him, there would be no Apple, no Jobs as Messiah, no trillion-dollar empire. So in the end, the story of Apple is not just about technology. It is about the eternal tension between brains and bravado, between invention and illusion. And maybe, just maybe, the smartest move any of us can make is to ask ourselves, do I want to be the builder or the storyteller? Or, if you are ambitious, be both. But if you only know how to solder wires, at least bring a friend who can work a microphone.